Welcome to Life and Liberty Radio with David Householder. I'm Josh Jose, and together, you and I are taking another step toward freedom, both spiritual and political. So get comfortable, breathe in, and ignite your imagination. Envision a society that is spiritually deep and truly free. It's easy if you try.
This summer, I visited the site of the Battle of the Little Bighorn, the site popularly remembered as Custer's last stand. To get there, we drove east from Billings, Montana. It took about an hour, which in Montana terms meant it was practically next door. The drive along the interstate took us along the rolling prairies, the huge empty grasslands, reaching out to infinity. I remember feeling glad to have the comfort and safety of a car, to be contained in. It's not hard to feel small in a land like this. The views stretch out, the sun burns down, the winds always blow. On the small hilltop where the famous last stand took place, there's a haunting feeling. Among the members of the 7th Cavalry who died there were boys. Had to be boys. Kids. From New Hampshire, from Michigan, Eastern boys. They must have felt overwhelmed and awed by the emptiness of the plains. I stood there thinking, what a lonely place to come to die. Along the hilltop there were collections of white grave markers marking the places where soldiers died. Here and there you also find brown granite markers, designated places where Indians died. We listened for an hour or so as the park ranger told us the story of the battle and the events leading up to it. The battle took place June 25 and 26, 1876. In the 1870s, the United States government gave about half of South Dakota to the American Indians as a reservation, a place for them to live. For a people who were at least partly nomadic and had no real understanding or concept of land ownership, even half of South Dakota wasn't nearly enough. Things got worse when a recession hit the eastern U.S., and worse still when they found gold in the Black Hills. The cry went out, "There's gold in them thar hills." Suddenly the land we gave the Indians forever was taken from them as thousands of settlers and gold miners rushed for the hills. Crazy Horse and the other Indian leaders tried to fight to save their way of life. And as great a military victory for the Indians that day, it was a classic case of winning the battle and losing the war. The Battle of the Little Bighorn would be the last battle the Indians would ever win, outside a courtroom. And so much of the clash of powers and as much as it was a battle of powers, it was also a clash of cultures and an understanding of life and ownership. The Indians very clearly understood the land they lived on was not owned by them. It was a gift entrusted to them. They understood the earth was made so they would have what they needed to live. We have a much different understanding of property and ownership, at least on the surface. We buy, we sell, we measure, we survey, all the rest, and yet at some point we're forced, all of us, to accept that everything we have has a lot more in common with furniture from IKEA than anything permanent. Now, IKEA has wonderful stuff, and after you figure out not to go backwards through the entire store, it's an interesting place to shop. They have great deals. There's some well-made stuff to be had at IKEA, but beware. Several years ago, we purchased dressers from IKEA for our 3 sons. Now, 3 boys, 3 dressers. After a year or two, I came to a conclusion, especially when you're dealing with young boys, that one does not buy dressers from IKEA. You only rent them. You have the dressers for a time. You can enjoy them. They are wonderful and they are nice, but at some point I feel like they're all just going to kind of collapse in front of themselves. After a couple of years, we no longer have 3 dressers from IKEA. We're down to 1. And it's not just the case with dressers made from particle board that you buy from IKEA and assemble in your living room. It's the same for our homes as well. If you have a mortgage, and let's be honest, when you fill out a credit application, they have that little box to check for owning or renting. There needs to be a third category, because for most people with mortgages, they don't own their house. Some bank somewhere does for years to come. As Christians, we certainly participate in the economic realities of the world, and at the same time we do so with an understanding that our lives remain distanced from the focus on ownership and possessions. As Christians, we buy and sell and all the rest, but with an understanding that in reality we own nothing. We may have things for a time, but in the end, nothing is fully ours. In Scripture, the image of the manager or caretaker is frequently lifted up. Often there's talk of caretakers. We're accompanied we're compared to these folks who are given responsibility to care for things they do not own. This is one way of describing our lives. We are caretakers. It's the story of Huguette Clark, told by Bill Dedman in his book Empty Mansion. Huguette was an impossibly wealthy woman. By the time she died, after living for around a century, she was worth around $300 million. Fabulously wealthy. She owned amazing mansions on both coasts of the country and yet lived for decades in a simple hospital room. Not because she was sick, but because she liked it there, and she could afford $400,000 a year for a hospital room. At one point, Bill tells of meeting the caretaker of one of the massive mansions owned by Huguette, valued at something like $20 million. The caretaker just had one question for the author. "Tell me," he said, "is she still alive?" It had been 20 years since she'd set foot on the property, and through it all this caretaker had been faithfully maintaining the property, taking care of the house and the grounds and the rest. Seems to me this is a bit of a model for us all. It was the psalmist who reminds us, "The earth is the Lord's and the fullness thereof." In other words, everything in all creation belongs to God. And it's not just the stuff of our lives that belongs to God. In fact, the stuff of our lives, our homes, our money, our cars, our possessions, that's the least of it. It's the privilege of being alive. It's the cute poem about growing older that Pete Seeger turned into a song and said, "I get up each morning and dust off my wits, open the paper and read the obits. If I'm not there, I know I'm not dead. So I eat a good breakfast and go back to bed." It's the family, it's the people around us, the family and friends who fill our lives with wonder and joy. It's the gift of those lives entrusted to our care, our children when they're young, our parents as they age. In all things we are caretakers, given these amazing gifts by the amazing grace and generosity of God. So we celebrate the life entrusted to us and the lives entrusted to us, remembering that every moment of every day is a gift from God.
Well, that's all for today on Life and Liberty Radio. Thanks so much for sharing this part of your spiritual journey with me. Now, the views on this program are not necessarily those of my advertisers, sponsors, places I work or do business with. They're purely my own, but I'm sharing them with you, so share your ideas with me. Write me on Twitter at Liberty House, LIBERTYHOUS, no E. Until next time, let's continue dreaming and working for a free and spiritually grounded society.